Hi, I'm Jenna Fleming, a licensed counselor in Georgetown, Texas, and I'm also the owner of Central Texas Child and Family Counseling. We have locations in Georgetown and in Liberty Hill. And I'm really grateful to be able to offer this video series to you at Hopewell Middle School on managing stress as a parent in your family. And some of these tools can also be translated in ways that you can help your children, whether they're young or old, because a lot of the tools that work with as adults can also be helpful with our children. So today I want to talk to you about something that I mentioned in the previous video, and that's really about you challenging our thoughts, okay? So in the last video I talked about 6 different coping skills and kind of how different tools can fall under these different coping skill categories. Well, one of those categories was called thought challenge, and I said I was going to expand on that in a video coming up, and so that's what I want to focus on today, because when we're under stress, our thoughts can get hijacked very easily. Human beings are created in this wonderful way that we have so many survival instincts that help to keep us alive and safe, and they're wonderful. We don't want to get rid of them, but some of them are not needed anymore, and some of them can become very unhelpful. So when we're under stress, we have this old tendency, and I say old meaning like back from our ancestors, and even think like when there were cavemen and women who needed to survive. When they were under stress, their stress was life or death threats. So if, let's say, there was a bush next to them and they could hear some sort of rumbling in the bush over there, their instincts were to immediately assume the worst, right? Because if they assumed that there was a bunny rabbit just hopping around making a noise next to them, but it was actually a tiger or a bear, their life was in jeopardy. So as a survival instinct, our mind, when something happens and we're under stress, jumps to a negative outcome to protect us. That's a good thing if we're out in a life-threatening situation. Today, in the challenges that we face in our society, in our lives, in the moment, it's very rare that we are under those life and death situations, but yet our mind tends to jump to the negative. So while it's protective and helpful in some instances, it's not always helpful today. And as a matter of fact, it can become destructive in our relationships, in our physical wellness, and our mental wellness, and it can compound the effects of stress. So the first thing I want to do is highlight some very common unhelpful thinking patterns that tend to pop up. Some of us lean on these habitually, meaning this is kind of a normal way that we think. Some of us, we see it pop up more when we're under stress. They tend to amplify when we have higher moments of stress. So a couple of patterns that are very common. One of them is all or nothing thinking. So this is the type of thinking when you might say to yourself, if I didn't win, then I've lost. If it's not perfect, I've failed. Either I do it right or not at all. That type of thinking is all or nothing. It leaves no room for gray. It doesn't allow for mistakes. And quite frankly, it's not very helpful because we kind of dig ourselves in and we don't allow for other possibilities. But this is pretty common, especially when we're under stress. Another unhelpful thinking style that's pretty common is overgeneralizing. And that's where we take one issue and we apply it to all. Let's say someone was rude to you when you were shopping at H-E-B, and we might overgeneralize that shopping is terrible and H-E-B is overcrowded and people there are rude. Well, is that true? Or could you have generalized one experience and applied it to a wider range? We, as parents, might get into the habit of saying things like, my kids never help, my spouse doesn't ever get the things I want done around the house, nobody ever helps with the dishes around here. So when you start hearing yourself using some of that language, you might be overgeneralizing. Another unhelpful thinking pattern that's pretty common is mental filtering. So when we consume information all day, there's tons of it, there's no way our minds could possibly comprehend every single bit of information, or we would just like be frozen. Could you imagine if I wasn't focusing and filtering out some information right now and I was literally processing every single thing? I'd be thinking about the way my sweater felt against my skin and the little noise I heard next to me, and I wonder if this plant needs watering. We would become highly distracted. So we have to filter out information. But what happens is when we're under stress, we tend to filter out the positive. So while we might have stress at work, we might have filtered out the fact that our boss gave us a compliment. Or although there are chores that weren't done at home, we might have filtered out the fact that our kids did get their homework done, or our spouse ran to the grocery store and picked something up for us before he or she came home from work. So being aware, are you filtering out all the positives and only looking at the negatives? That's a common but unhelpful thinking style. Another one is jumping to conclusions. And that's where we say, okay, this is happening. And so then I'm just gonna assume that this is the end result. That's kind of like fortune telling or mind reading, and often it's not helpful. Now, we can feel like it's protective, and a lot of people will say, well, I'd rather assume the worst than risk, being vulnerable or embarrassed or whatever. But it's often not fair. So if you're jumping to conclusions without really knowing the information, it could be one of those unhelpful thinking styles. Another, and this will be the last one, there's so many more, but this is very common, and that's magnifying or catastrophizing. That's when we take one problem that is a very real problem and we magnify the size of it. So the house is a mess, or my kids were being rude, and we really have just this sort of blown up response to it in the way that we act or the way that we think, or we might say it's never going to get better, when really and truly, if we just pause and look at things, it's not quite as large as it feels. But stress does that. This is normal. So if this is you, guess what? It's me too. It's all of us. We all experience things that are protective but not helpful when we're under stress. And our minds can really get hijacked. And we can get into these patterns where we're repeatedly thinking in a negative, unhelpful way, and it's hard to get out of it. So I want to give you some tips that's going to help. Now, it's not going to solve this problem. If a person is in a very strong pattern of negative thinking, if you really have a difficult time getting a handle on your negative thought patterns, it's not going to take a video to correct that, because you probably have strong habits of going back to those negative thoughts. And the truth is, part of it might be part of your personality, your protective personality. There are good things to that protective personality. We just don't want it to hijack your happiness or your children's or your family's. So the first thing is, I want you to, number one, identify where are the areas that you want to change. If you've noticed that your thoughts are hijacking your commute to work, or your relationship with your child or with your spouse, I want you to pick one area. I don't want you to try and fix all of your mental filters in the way that you're thinking everywhere all the time, because you're likely going to feel really frustrated and defeated. So just pick one area. Identify all the areas where it's causing pain, and identify one area that you're going to focus on, and we're just going to focus on one area at a time. Give it a good week, and I want you to try small steps to make those changes. And just notice when those negative thoughts come up, okay? Step 2, I want you to check yourself, meaning pay more mindful attention to what you're thinking. In that one moment, let's say it's your commute to work, I want you to become more and more aware of your thoughts in that time. Or if it's about your child, become more aware of your thoughts about your child. And I want you to check yourself when you start thinking negatively and just call it out. Like, there I go again. I'm going right to the negative. I'm going back to that old pattern. I want you to just notice that that's what you're doing so that you can put the brakes on that if at all possible. And you might say, Jenna, I can't. All right, just give me a chance. Notice yourself, and I want you to check yourself, and then I want you to kind of laugh at yourself, not in a mean way, not in a shaming way at all, but I want you to just kind of be playful, because playfulness can lift our spirits and it can get us out of that funk and that stressful moment. So just say somebody's being rude or whatever when you're driving to work. Notice what your pattern is, and I want you just to be like, whatever, man, and maybe turn on some happy music or do something that lifts your spirit, okay? Get yourself out of the grouchy, grumpy, gray area and do one thing that sort of helps you to crack a smile, okay? So number 4, this is about developing habits to touch all areas of your life, and that's having a healthy lifestyle. When we eat junk, we tend to feel like junk. When we are not active, we tend to have low energy in all areas of our life. When you have more physical activity, when you're eating healthier foods, you tend to feel better, you tend to have more energy, and you tend to have more of a handle on managing your stress in general, which is going to make changing these habits much easier and much more likely to stick. And then the last thing, and the 5th thing I want you to focus on, is just practicing positive self-talk. Listen, we all have habits that are unbecoming. We all reach a certain point where we're not really proud of our behavior and our negative traits start coming out. That's normal. It's our job to be aware of these things and to do our very best to grow as human beings, to help our children grow as human beings. And we have to start as models, right? So if your child is having a hard time with their stress or their mental filter or their thoughts or their negativity or whatever, it's your responsibility to be the emotional adult and model for them what it means to make these changes. And so practice positive self-talk. Like, you know what? I struggle, but struggle is something all humans do. I can keep doing this. Today was a rough day, tomorrow's gonna be a better day. As you practice that habit of talking more positively to yourself, it's going to help you have more skills and more of a habit in thinking and talking more positively in other areas of your life. So again, this video is not going to solve the issue. It's not going to make those lifelong changes. It's small steps with practice over time. And there's actually neurowiring that happens as you do anything repeatedly. You're going to get more practiced at it and it's going to come more natural. Think about anything you've done in your life. Let's say you played sports. I used to be a dancer when I was in high school. And what would we do? We'd learn a new routine and then we'd practice and we 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 practice. So when it was time to get up on stage or to perform or to be in a competition, I never had to think about the steps. My body remembered what to do. Even though I was flooded with nervousness and emotions, my body knew exactly what to do. I had muscle memory. And we can develop that muscle memory in how we think. So it starts with practice and you're gonna fumble, but that's okay. So I hope this is helpful to challenge those negative thoughts as a way of managing stress and helping to really reduce the stress in yourself and those around you and even strengthen those relationships. I hope there's something that you can take away and put into action, and thank you so much for your time and listening.